All right, welcome everyone to the last panel of the day. My name is Trish Patel. I am the Director of Early Career Development at WestRock, and I'm excited to be here to moderate the panel of Breaking Barriers, the Changing Workforce in Our Industry. I've got a couple of awesome folks here with me today, and we will actually cover their introductions in just a second. But before I do that, I'd like to go ahead and cover a quick introduction about myself, and once we go through the introductions, we'll kind of free flow into the questions right after that. So as I mentioned, my name is Trish Patel. In my current role, I work at WestRock, and I'm responsible for early career development. So basically the intern co-op full-time experience for folks that are early in their careers. I kind of help, my team helps with all of that. Prior to joining WestRock, I was with Georgia Pacific for about 8 years. My background is in chemical engineering. I graduated from Florida A&M University College of Engineering back in 2012. And I started with Georgia Pacific in their engineering development program in process control and automation at one of their tissue towel and napkin plants in Palatka, Florida. And did that for a couple of years, moved into manufacturing operations to get operations experience. I was a bleach plant manufacturing engineer for a little bit, and then moved back into controls and automation and took more of a engineering leadership role at the Palatka tissue towel and napkin mill. After that, I pivoted my career a little bit more towards talent acquisition, talent development, where I led the engineering development program for all of Georgia Pacific. So in that role, I was responsible for shaping what that experience looked like for engineers entering the workforce at Georgia Pacific as an intern co-op or early career engineer. And so worked with an awesome group of folks for about 3 years and made some changes to the engineering development program there, which is kind of what got me into my current role at WestRock, leading the early careers. So that's a little bit about me. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and get our panelists to introduce themselves. So Aldo, I guess we'll start with you, and then after that, we'll let Sarah introduce herself. Aldo?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. As it was mentioned, my name is Aldo De Leon. I'm a current 5th year at NC State, obtaining a degree in both chemical engineering and paper science and engineering, pardon me. I've had plenty of internship experiences with companies from WestRock to International Paper, as well as outside the paper industry with the Clorox Company and Eastman Chemical. I'll be graduating this May and joining International Paper for a full-time position in the Georgetown mill. Outside of work, though, I do have other hobbies that include hiking and photography. And I'm involved with the Goodnight Scholars Program at NC State, as well as the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Aldo. Sarah?
Hey everyone, my name is Sarah Sassarosi. I graduated from NC State with my degree in paper science and engineering in May of 2017 and joined Sunoco full-time in our Holyoke, Massachusetts paper mill after graduating. I spent a little bit over 2 years as a process engineer and then moved into the plant engineer role, which many would call a maintenance manager, and was responsible for all of our maintenance and reliability activities and managing our maintenance shop for a little bit over 1.5 years. As of January of this year, I've moved into our superintendent role and now manage our production department and oversee the production of our cylinder paperboard machine. Though it's cold, I think the high today in March is still only 30 degrees. I love living up in Massachusetts and never saw myself as someone who would live in New England after graduation. But so far, I'm very happy to be here.
All right, thank you for that, Sarah. So as I'd mentioned earlier, I'll be moderating to this panel, and we will dive right into the questions. As the audience can see, we've got a couple of great panelists with a diverse set of experiences across different companies. So I'm excited to jump right in. So I guess, Sarah, we will start with you. What are new engineers looking for, in terms of company culture, work-life balance, career path, technical and business challenges? Give us a little bit of insight into what, from your point of view, engineers are looking for in today's world.
It's a lot of pressure to manage or to represent all engineers as far as this answer. So I know when I was graduating, I was looking for 2 things particularly. One, I chose my mill because it had a demonstrated history of promoting process engineers up through a superintendent level and beyond. And I knew that that was the path that I wanted my career to take. So I chose this mill because the plant manager had done that several times before, and particularly with women. And I was excited to go to a mill that understood the culture of working with women in a leadership position. But I think in general, people are really looking, this sounds so cheesy, but just to not be just a number and really feel like they're integrated in the mill family. I know when we're hosting new engineers, trying to convince them to come and work in our mill, we obviously invite them to lunch. Pre-COVID, our whole management team got together to have lunch every day at noon in the conference room. And I think that just demonstrates that it's a family atmosphere and one where we genuinely care about each other and work well across silos. And I think that people are kind of looking to feel like they are an important member of a team and not just one of many that's been hired to do a job.
Gotcha. I guess, Aldo, we'd love to get your perspective on the same question.
Yeah, I agree. I think that as people hiring right now new engineers, they're looking for someone that's smart, quick on their feet, and isn't afraid of challenge. But in addition to that, I mean, I resonate with what she's saying. They're looking for a friendly face as well. They're looking for someone to, ultimately work alongside and have conversations that are beyond work and build a relationship. I like to say that my first internship was the very first time I ever watched American football. I grew up playing soccer, and football wasn't really my sport, but ultimately it allowed me to have conversation with the operators that I was working with, and that helped us build a stronger relationship that in return helped me when I needed help in any project that I was working on as an intern. So they're just looking for someone they can relate to, someone that is excited to be there, and someone that can be a part of their family.
All right. So I guess just a question added on to that, right? I don't know if any of you were in a situation where you were contemplating between a couple of different offers. If you were in that situation, what exactly put the other offer over the edge, right?
Yeah, so in particular, one summer, the summer that I decided to intern for Eastman Chemical, the reason I made that decision was because I know that they had a history of building a fostering community for all the interns. They had them living in the same apartment, and it ultimately allowed them to come together and really work as a team and get to know each other outside of work as well. And that was a deciding factor for me from my other offers that I had on the table at the time. And it was also just a different industry, and that kind of pushed me in that direction. Other people talking about their programs and how they include interns, and they allow them to be their own and be their own family.
Got it. And so the presence of other early career talent within those facilities, did that play a big role into it, if I'm hearing you correctly?
Yeah, of course. I think that was one of the flaws that I saw with one of my very early internships, the fact that I was the only young person there, and having the opportunity to hang out with other people my age, like-minded individuals that shared a little bit more interest in me, definitely pushed me in that direction. Those are that early career people.
Gotcha.
Doesn't mean I don't like hanging out with older people, but.
Got it. Sarah?
So I did several internships with Sunoco, so I didn't field any different offers between companies, but I did have the opportunity to choose which mill location I worked at. And I based my decision, one, because I was an intern actually in our Holyoke, Massachusetts mill. So I was familiar with the culture, familiar with the team, and really wanted to come back here. But geographic preference was a strong factor for me as well. I know that, a lot of mills that have been there 50, 100 years, that there's no way that we're ever going to pick them up and move them to, maybe a more urban or desirable location. But I knew that I had wanted to stay in the kind of along the East Coast, and really liked the area in Massachusetts where I was.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. So I'd also like to segue into one other thing, work-life balance, right? As somebody that's, typically looking at trends for early career talent, I know work-life balance is something that typically comes up, and I'd like to hear from both of you on, how that played into making a decision when it came to your current role or your previous internship or co-op role. and how Sarah, especially for you, being a plant superintendent, how do you manage that work-life balance? And we'll start with you.
It's definitely something that I have to work on every day, because if unchecked, I can lean towards working more in the evenings and working on weekends. So it's something that I have to be purposeful in doing. Really, the biggest thing that's helped me work with work-life balance is trusting the mill in the hands of others, and we're working on a formal on-call rotation, but right now just an informal on-call rotation, where last summer with COVID, I did a lot of camping. I'd proactively communicate, hey, I'm gonna be, out of pocket this weekend, not somewhere where I didn't have self-service, but not really ready to come into the mill and troubleshoot any issues. So it's, I think Jennifer said it best in a webinar recently, that it's a work-life blend more so
Sure.
now instead of a work-life balance. But it's definitely something I still have a lot to learn with.
Got it. And Aldo, I'd love to get your perspective as well.
Yeah, so I think I have a little bit of experience from that. I know that in my first internship as well, they had a cold shutdown of the whole mill. So in that particular 2 weeks, it was a very intense time to be working. You had to be on site. I was mainly poking my nose around and asking questions, but at the same time, there was a lot of work to be done, and it was a high stress moment. But while you do have those circumstances where it's all hands on deck, there's also other opportunities where or other weeks where they're a little bit more flexible. Maybe the work's a little slow, and you kind of compensate for those harder weeks with those a little easier weeks. And I know that was the same case with Eastman Chemical, where on Fridays they'd give us half days off so long as your work was done, and that came with self-responsibility. And I think a lot of companies are moving to this new idea of for these new generation of engineers, that they value their own time. And that was a very important aspect when I was making my decision to work for International Paper. The day I came in for a lunch, even though it was during COVID, they had a guy that was out for the day because he had a signing on a house, and they kind of made it. When you're young and you're moving to a new city, there's a lot of things you got to figure out. You got to figure out your new doctor. You got to set up your cable, and there's times where you have to be at your apartment, or maybe you're signing on a house. There's a lot of things that come with the young adulthood, and International Paper made it seem like they were acceptable to that, and they were flexible with you, and they wanted to work with you. And that's an important thing that any company that truly appreciates it will communicate that with you. And that went a long way when I went for the luncheon with International Paper, and hence why I made the decision to go there.
Gotcha. Thank you for that, Aldo. So I guess that leads us to our next question. What are some of the things from your point of view that employers just don't understand about entry-level engineers, right?
Well, that's a difficult question for me to answer because I haven't started a full-time position. So I don't know what I don't know yet. But I have heard from a lot of other, just from the chit-chatting in the locker room or whatever it is. I feel like a lot of times the new engineers feel as though they're not being fully challenged right away. I think they came from a high stress. And I'm not saying Dr. Bird is putting us under more pressure than we need to be, but there is a lot of high stress at a university right now. And you kind of come into your entry-level year, and you're coasting a little bit. They want you to learn everything, and that's probably part of the learning curve. But I feel like a lot of times they're a little bit, engineers feel frustrated with that. They feel like they're not being challenged to the level that they were within a few months. I think for interns, and especially given the nature of how short those internships are, they don't understand the kind of stress that goes outside of the actual work life. You're moving to a new city a lot of the time. You don't really figure out housing. And from my experience, sometimes they don't tend to provide you with a lot of assistance on where to get an apartment for the time being, or a short-term lease. And I think that those are some of those things that I have seen on my new effort going into that, but they could definitely improve on.
I echo Aldo, this is a difficult question, but I was able to come up with two things. So one, Gallup did a study recently, and I think this applies across generations, but particularly to millennials and Gen Z, that people are looking now more for coaches rather than bosses and someone to supervise them. Like, you come out of this college experience where you are getting feedback in the form of grades from professors on a near daily basis sometimes. And some people can be kind of thrown into this void of not receiving feedback outside of a formal performance review every 6 months to a year. And I think that new college grads are really looking for more of an ongoing conversation when it comes to feedback, rather than a formal sit down where you don't realize that there could have been small adjustments that you could have made to improve your performance and improve, how well you're doing the job up until that time. And second, as millennials and Gen Z coming up, a lot of people will joke that we are the participant trophy generation. And depending on how you were raised, I think that some people really have not had the opportunity to fail until they maybe come into their first full-time position. And I think that a lot of people bring a fear of failure into their first jobs and maybe a hesitancy to try something new. So I would kind of challenge people to view that as a strength as the number of people coming in increases. For example, someone who is worried about failing and really wants to do a good job might be better at risk analysis and pre-planning for something like a shutdown planning, because they might not be as willing to just wing it and see how it goes. If they're worried about it, they might put more time and effort into planning more effectively. That's not to say that we don't need to work on building people's confidence through giving them ownership of new projects and really allowing kind of their voices to be heard and them to feel like they're a valuable contributing member of the team. But I think that is going to be something that we're seeing with in an increasing amount as more people from this new generation begin to graduate.
No, I think Sarah nailed that right in the head. I didn't know I wanted a coach more than I wanted a boss till she said it, and she's 100% right. I've seen that through my internships where another big thing was deadlines. I felt like there's an urgency with projects, and when you're in school, you have homeworks and they're due on a Friday or Thursday or things like that, where you don't get that gratification when you're working in industry. They tell you to do something and it's just get it done as soon as you can, but there's no check mark, to check it off. And I think that's one of those things that Sarah was kind of hinting at.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's never fully done in the real world. I never just get to turn something in and then never have to think about it again. It's
Correct.
Following up, making sure controls are in place, that the project is going to continue for months and years to come, rather than being something that, you slowly lose over time.
Right.
So we'll segue into another question now. So what are some of those mega trends that you think will impact engineering talent entering the industry? And Sarah, we'll start with you this time.
So I think that the HR and operations panel answered this question pretty effectively. One thing that I would highlight is the effect that the aging workforce in the paper industry, I think, is going to have on us. I see a lot of the technical experts and suppliers and vendors that I rely on to be experts in this industry are in their 50s and 60s right now. And in some cases, I'm not seeing their succession planning in terms of how they are going to download this wealth of knowledge into the person who's going to come up after them. Even when I moved into the plant engineer role, I was replacing someone with 45 years of experience, and I can't even pretend to have a 10th of the knowledge that he had about paper making in the mill. And we were able to be successful relying on other people who are wealths of knowledges. But I see the mega trend of retirements continuing and our population aging as one that we really will need to step up as a generation to get ready to take on as much information as we can.
Got it. Thank you for that. Aldo, from your point of view, what are some of those trends that will impact new engineers entering the industry?
Yeah, so again, not to sound like a broken record, but I think that is a great point. With my previous internship, I worked with International Paper at their Advanced Analytics Center. And one of our main efforts was to standardize a lot of the calculations and expertise that the subject matter experts in any given area had. And it was a way of, so in my answer, I'm going to say that we're in the age of data. And it's very important for us engineers to collect all the information from those older gentlemen and women that will be retiring in the near future. And that was what this initiative was. So I guess in a way, I'm being a little bit more hopeful about this knowledge gap, and that there are companies and there are initiatives right now that are taking an active stand and are realizing what this trend is going towards. and they're taking that initiative to fill in the knowledge gap. And that was what we were doing. In particular, we were working on the chlorine dioxide generators, and we wanted to standardize all the calculations for ratios or any flows or anything that was important, even puffs on the generator. And so, yeah, that's one of the things that I see, this new utilization of the data that we have, and giving us an opportunity to learn the system, and squeezing everything that the previous people know about the system so that we can be successful on our own.
What are some of the things that we can do as an industry to remain competitive? And Aldo, I'll start with you for this one.
Yeah, so I'll continue to go off on that soap opera. I think it's this idea of automation of our data, and being more efficient with the way we interpret data. I know that we're using new systems like Pi Asset Framework and Power BI, and I believe there is a new one that I can't think of the name right now. But there are a lot of new data that new applications that we're bringing onto our systems, and we're making intelligent machinery that can communicate with us our needs. And that's important for the industry itself, and for us to be able to coexist with our machinery. And I think that, from university, that's another thing that they're making a big push of. They want us to be able to understand how we can use software with our hardware. And ultimately, that's what's going to keep us competitive. And the people that can understand that dynamic environment are going to be the people that are successful within the industry.
Got it. Thank you for that. Sarah, what about you? From your point of view, what are some of those things that we need to focus on to remain competitive?
That's a really good question. Outside of, preparing for the knowledge gap that we already talked about, they talked about it in previous panels, but I think focusing on diversity and inclusion and hiring, and making our workplaces more inclusive for diverse populations is going to be something that's absolutely necessary. The more different minds we have working on solving the problems of tomorrow, the more effective we're going to be at solving them, whether it's making our industry more sustainable, making it better to fight against things like climate change, or making things more efficient for the different growing populations that we'll have across the world that will need our pulp and paper products for the future.
Thank you for that, Sarah. So I guess before we open it for questions, one of the things I want to talk about is what you mentioned, Sarah: diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. When you think about just our industry in general, right, we definitely have an opportunity as different companies to attract more diverse talent to our plants, to our operating facilities. What are some of the ways that we can do that?
That's a really good question. I think that it starts with the workforce, and it starts with the good work that NC State's doing in recruiting a diverse pool of candidates to enter our industry. One particular opportunity I think we see in manufacturing facilities is there's a lot of great work going on with different business resource groups at a corporate level in a lot of the pulp and paper companies we have. But I think really getting that education and those initiatives to the floor to make the workforce a more inclusive and welcoming place for anyone, whether you're working in IT, supply chain, or out working directly on the paper machine, will be crucial for us moving forward.
All right, Aldo?
Yeah, I think well, those programs are important, but I also see a different aspect to it. I think that throughout my internships and my lab work that I've done in teams, I've always encouraged my team members to be curious and accepting about each other's cultures. I know that it's really big for me to introduce them to Mexican cuisine. I know that when I was traveling with the international team, I'd always offer to look for the best Mexican restaurant at whatever city we were at. I know that with my lab group, I always invite them to go to El Toro, which is one of the best Mexican foods in Raleigh. So it's just about introducing each other and being accepting of one another in our cultures. And if we can have this mentality, especially for this generation coming in, and we can be nurturing for older generations that might be a little bit more stagnant in their ways of thinking, they can see how welcoming we can be and how inclusive we can be. And it's just about having a change in our mentality. And I think it starts with an individual, and you have to present them the opportunity to take a leap, and that's what I've been trying to do. And I think while it lies in the while it's the responsibility of the majority, it's also the responsibility of the minority to allow people to see what your culture is about and what you can offer.
Absolutely. I love your point of view on that, Aldo. Thank you for sharing that. Reverse mentoring goes a long way, you know, with especially many times you might have managers that sometimes, you know, quite often you need to manage, right? You need to coach them so that way they can help them coach you. So I love both yours and Sarah's perspective on that. With that, I want to thank both of you guys for your time and your input, and we'd love to open it up for questions.